Hello, everyone. Welcome to my communication class. I am the subject matter expert on communication. I am a certified public speaker. I know almost everything there is to know about communication. I will tell you things that you need to know, many of which you've probably heard nothing about before. And I pretty much am the expert on communication. Hey, everybody. I'm Skip Stevens, Fire Chief, Cotterville Fire District. Do me a favor and remember how you were feeling in that moment just now as I introduced the class in the way that I did. I've been the fire chief here for just over a year and a half. I started as a rookie firefighter way back when I was about 23 years old. I've been here coming up on 22 years. I worked my way up through the ranks. I became a captain and then an assistant chief, and then finally the fire chief, which as I mentioned, I am now. Also, during my time here at Cotterville, I was a big part of founding and developing our sister organization, our charitable wing called Cotterville Firefighters Outreach. My biggest role in the development of that nonprofit organization was really bringing people together, the firefighters and volunteers and community leaders. I brought people together for a specific purpose of furthering our mission of making our community a better place to live, healthier, happier, and safer. And we developed a lot of great charitable programs and initiatives through the years. So I bring all of that up just because I want to say that I think I've learned a few things through the years. I certainly don't know everything, but I want to share with you today a few of the three, to be specific, barriers that I have found to be inhibitors to effective communication from a personal, team, and organizational standpoint. And I also want to share with you some strategies that I have found to be effective in combating, counteracting those barriers. In the fire service, communication is everything. When you walk in to begin your shift as a firefighter, the first thing you do is you have to communicate. You have to communicate some very important things. Your first job is to receive a semi-formal report from the firefighter or the shift that's going off duty. So the firefighter takes that information from the other firefighter. The fire truck driver, what we call engineer, that's coming on duty receives their report from the engineer that's going off duty. And they talk about very important things. The engineers might talk about the truck, something specific to the truck, something that needs addressed, something that could go wrong or is wrong with the truck. Maybe the pump is acting up or something like that. And they exchange that information. And the captains do the same thing. If there's something maybe in occupancy or a commercial business or a home or something going on of a place of a call that they were in, and they found something dangerous that could put us at risk. In the case of an emergency, there might be something going on with a roadway. Anyways, it's important information that they have to give and receive. And you take that same thought and you put it, the communication that we have on the scene of an emergency, on the fire ground. We have incredibly important life and death communication that occurs. And it usually occurs on our walkie-talkies or portable radios, mobile radios, or sometimes it's face-to-face, but not usually. So communication is really, really critical in the fire service. As a fire chief, my communication is typically a little bit different, very challenging. So I have 60 people in my organization, and instead of trying to communicate with a team of 2 or 3, trying to communicate with a more broad audience has its own challenges. And I'm still working through that and developing myself as a communicator and a leader. So that's what we're going to talk about today. 3 barriers to effective communication and strategies to overcome those barriers. Communication. How important is it? I think we all underestimate the importance of communication in our lives and in our jobs. It is frequently cited as the #1 problem in organizations. And why do people leave organizations? Because they have a bad boss. People don't quit jobs, they quit their managers. And when managers are bad, they're usually bad communicators, just the way it is. So how important is it? It's communication is king, not just in the fire service, but in everybody's lives. When I became the fire chief back in 2000, the very first thing I did is I had one-on-one meetings with each of the other 59 employees. And I asked them about things like their thoughts about the organization, their personal goals, any complaints, issues that they might have, suggestions for improvement. And the most frequently cited issue was either lack of communication or ineffective communication. Are we unique? I don't think so. Cottleville Fire District is not unique in that regard. I know the same is true for your organization. So communication is vitally important. And I want to ask you, raise your hand. I won't be able to see, but let's just say I can. Raise your hand if you are a fantastic communicator. If you are that person that has just developed yourself to the point where you can always get your point across just right and you never have any issues with communication. If I could see you, I would say there's probably no hands up or very few. And even if you put your hand up, I would say there's always room for improvement. And really, well, how do you feel about having that difficult conversation with a disciplinary situation at work, or the difficult conversation with a loved one? I think you get my point. And here's the fact. We as people suck at communication, myself included. We are not good at it. And why? Why? We do it so often. Have you ever really considered how many times you communicate in a day? And it's really from the time you wake up all day until the time you go to bed. We are communicating with someone somewhere. So we really should get better at it. And if you're going to get better at something, communication is the thing to get better at. You can't be a good leader, a good boss, really a good family member, good parent, without being somewhat good at communication. When I wake up in the morning, the first person that I communicate with is not my spouse, but my dog, Teddy. And yes, I just said the first person I communicate with in the morning is my dog, Teddy. And dogs are people. If you don't understand that, well, I feel sorry for you. So what I want to do when I open my eyes is put my feet on the floor, walk to my kitchen, and pour myself a cup of coffee, which is already made thanks to the technology of 2021. But the reality is this: I start to sneak out of my bedroom, and Teddy, who is a 10-month-old basset hound with these long ears, sleeps in a crate right next to my bed, on my side of the bed. And so when I get up and I try to sneak out, he starts whimpering, and he's like, "Hey, Dad, I have to pee. I've been in this stupid little crate all night. Let me out, let me out." So I pause, and I turn around, and I'm like, "Okay, Teddy, you good boy. Come on." And I take Teddy and I put him outside. And I tell you that story for a very specific reason. It's just a story about me and my dog. It has no educational value whatsoever. But I tell you that because everybody has something I call personal protection walls all around them, almost all of the time. Some people's walls are like thick concrete, like 10 feet of concrete, while other people's walls are much thinner. They're kind of like pieces of paper and could easily be penetrated. The reality is, for most of us, the walls are kind of somewhere in the middle. And what these walls are basically are protection devices. They keep us at a safe distance emotionally from other people. They keep people from being able to peer into our lives and see who we really are. These personal protection walls protect us and safeguard us against horrible things like criticism, judgment, exposure of who we really are, right? And the thing about these walls is they can be raised and they can be lowered by other people. For example, think about how you felt when I came on to start this video like this, telling you I was the subject matter expert and I knew everything there is to know about communication. How did you feel? Where were your walls? They were super high, right? You were not ready to hear anything I had to say. Compare that to how you felt about me and your readiness to listen and communicate after I told you. Well, I kind of built up my credibility talking about the fire service and about my experiences and all of that. It was very legitimate and building credibility as a speaker. But then I went and I told you about my dog Teddy. I exposed to you that I baby talk with my dog, and I kind of gave you a little insight into my life, and I showed you that yes, I am a human being, and I'm just like you, and I'm willing to share with you, right? And my hope was that I was able to display that I raised your walls and I lowered your walls only by my words and my nonverbal communication. We want to lower walls so we can have better communication, but how do we do that? People are turned off by other people for many different reasons, but when your walls, so what I did at the beginning is I raised my wall and I threw out a wall. Like I said, I am the man with communication. I don't care what you have to say. I don't even care to even think about you. All I'm concerned with is myself. I put up a wall. Walls are met with walls. Mimicking is something that we do. I know everybody has heard you get out of life, or you get out whatever, get back whatever you put out. And that is so true of communication. If you want to drop somebody else's walls, what you have to do is drop your own. You have to drop your own walls. And we do this through a very bold and daring activity called embracing our vulnerability through authenticity. So you have to be your truth self. You have to be authentic with people. You can't put on a fake front. You can't lead with your ego, right? And once you lower your walls, other people's walls will come down. This is something we do called mimicking. Have you ever spoken to somebody, been in a conversation, and you realize you're kind of leaning back and you got your hands crossed, and then you look over and you realize the other person's doing the exact same thing? And you can do this just for fun as an experiment. Next time you're talking to somebody, do that, and you see that, and then kind of do this. More times than not, the other person will do the exact same thing. Without even thinking about it, we subconsciously mimic, and we try to, it's our way of connecting with another person or not connecting with another person. So when you put your walls down, that gives permission. Subconsciously, I think more times than not, gives permission to the person you're communicating with to do the same. It's a simple thing to do, but it's not an easy thing to do. Most people find it very difficult to be very authentic and open, especially if it's their first communication with somebody, or especially if you're the boss. And vulnerability is looked at in society as what? It's looked at as a weakness. Dr. Brene Brown is an author that has written books such as Daring Greatly. and Dare to Lead, I think it's called, and some others. And what she talks about a lot in her books and TED Talks is vulnerability as a strength. And it is a strength. And when we show other people that we are willing to be vulnerable and authentic, it gives them the permission to do the same. Now, I caution you to not to share too much, too fast, too far, right? You have to know your audience. You have to have an awareness and understanding of yourself and the other person. And really what that is called is emotional intelligence. Just, I don't mean to keep name dropping authors, but Daniel Goleman, Goleman, is one of our foremost authorities on emotional intelligence. And the book Primal Leadership in particular is one that I really like. So I suggest reading a little bit more and developing your emotional intelligence. But we also, back to the point, you have to have boundaries and not go too far and share too much, because that can have that same effect or the opposite effect of people putting up their boundaries going, whoa, man, whoa, right? So it's an art. It's not a science, but it's an art. It's like a dance. So see vulnerability as a strength and accept that you have to be authentic and willing to be judged, criticized, exposed of who you really are. Once you can do that, your communication skills from a one-on-one standpoint will grow exponentially, but also this is applicable to the group and team setting as well. Team building exercises, for example, everybody hates them, but guess what? They are effective because they are designed to force people to be vulnerable, talk about themselves, expose things. Hey, tell us 3 things that we didn't know about you, right? What are we doing here? We're exposing ourselves. It's forced vulnerability. So it works in the group, team, and organizational setting as well. I know you have to be brave and bold, but I have faith in you that you can put your barriers down, lower them down, help other people do the same, and that opens that channel and that connection with other people. Okay, moving on to barrier to communication number 2. And that barrier is assumptions, especially assumptions that drive bias, right? So they say, most people have heard that to assume is to make an ass out of you and me, which is kind of funny because that's the spelling of assume, and it's unfortunately true. So communication is very perception based. Our perception is our reality. I know most people have probably seen that old school communication model where you have the sender and you have the receiver and you have the message and the channel, and then you have the feedback, right? And it's just like this loop, and it's in all these textbooks, and people go, oh wow, that's really cool. So that was designed in the 1940s. We're not going to talk about that today. There have been a ton of communication models built through the years by all these scholarly people. And when I envision the communication model and how it actually happens, it's kind of like this. When words are said and the receiver, takes in with their eyes and ears all of the information, it travels a long ways before it becomes thoughts and understanding of the information, right? So I think the communication model that I see has things like this: sender, sender's facial expression, sender's tone of voice, sender's previous experiences with the receiver, their inherent bias towards people like the receiver, the bias towards the receiver themselves, the emotional state of the sender, the number of hours of sleep the sender had before trying to communicate this, right? And then you have the message. So part of that is word selection, and delivery, but then you have the receiver, right? All the same things for the receiver. All of these filters and channels, previous experiences with the sender, the inherent bias that they hold, their political bias, their any bias that they have towards the gender and the ethnicity, the sexual preference, the age, the all of these things, that when the receiver looks at the sender, they are making assumptions about that person, and that affects so many things in the way that they hear, see, and receive information. Assumptions. And assumptions affect communication almost every time that we communicate. Do they affect your organization, your team? Do we make assumptions about people's intentions, about their intelligence, and all of these things, right? Assumptions have a big effect on what we say and how we say it, and our thoughts in general. So let me give you an example about assumptions gone bad, something that occurred in my life very recently. Last Saturday morning, we had a contractor come out to the house to give a bid on a kitchen remodel. We want to pull out our old kitchen cabinets and flooring and have new kitchen cabinets and flooring installed. So this guy shows up, contractor by himself. I've never met him before. He shows up at 9 o'clock, and we talk through the job. He gives me the bid, and we talk through the intricacies. And then got to be about 9:30 or so, and this fella, very nice gentleman, started going on and on. I would use the term droning on, because I was hoping that I could have him out of my house in 30 minutes. I had a lot of places to be and things to do. He made the assumption maybe that I had all day, and I wanted to hear about his family, his wife, and his kids sports and where they're from, and all of this. When in fact, I'm like, come on, man. Shut up and get out of my house so I can get on with what I need to get. Not that I didn't care, I didn't like, and didn't want to really engage, but I had things to do. So he made the false assumption that I wanted to sit and chew the fat all day. And then he started dropping F-bombs in his language with me about, and he did it several times. He didn't see anybody else in my house but me. He made the assumption that he and I were alone. He didn't know my 11-year-old son was in his room with his door open and was listening to our conversation. I knew he was, because he kind of wanted to be a part of it, but then he decided not to be. So how does that make me feel, right? And certainly I could have said something, chose not to, but this guy made this false assumption. He knew I was in the fire service, that I was a firefighter of sorts, so he assumed that this is the way I like to communicate. What if it would have been my wife that he met with instead of me? Would he have still used that kind of language? Probably not, I would guess, because he assumed, well, he's a guy's guy. So what if it would have been the both of us together? Would he have still, it's hard to say, right? But it was assumptions. And those false assumptions made me, as a potential client, less likely to engage with his services, right? Because I could tell he's just kind of off base, and he's not emotionally intelligent and aware of his surroundings and good at judging where you're at with somebody else. So that's one example that how assumptions can go awry. Do you have assumptions in the workplace? I know you do. I'm going to tell you about something I talk about a lot, and it's what I call the perception, because I said communication and assumptions are all about perception, but perception pizza pie, right? It's an old way of saying pizza, the old pizza pie, but perception pizza pie. And what it means is this: whether you're a family member, team member, or just at your organization at large, everybody has their own perspective on the organization. With my organization, we have 4 firehouses and an administration building, and we have 3 shifts: A shift, B shift, and C shift. And the firefighter that works on A shift at Station 2, he has a piece of pie, which is his personal perspective. You could call that, firefighter 2A perspective. That's the name of his piece of pie. And that is his viewpoint on the operations that we do, our workplace rules, our safety rules, the workplace morale, um, why the color of the trucks are what they are, right? He has a perspective, and it's based on his slice of the pie. The captain that works on C shift at Station 3, his piece is way on the other side of the pie, right? And the point is, you don't know what somebody else knows necessarily. You certainly don't walk in their shoes and understand all of their filters and all of those things that we talked about. And higher you go up in the organization, maybe the bigger your pieces of pie are, or maybe you have more than one piece of the pizza pie, right? But as the fire chief, I truly don't know what that new firefighter at Station 4 in Asia, I really can't say for sure how his piece tastes. I mean, have you ever tried to describe something, how something tastes? It's kind of like that in terms of understanding somebody else's perspective. So just visualizing that and vocalizing that with your team members or with your family members helps create the dynamic for increased empathy towards other people, and it helps unlock some of those assumptions, right? I understand that the assumptions that piece of pie, A4 or whatever it is because I don't truly understand it as well as I could. So I need to try to. I need to be more empathetic to understand. I don't know everything that they know, right? But I need to find out, ask questions. So just the awareness of the perspective pizza pie helps break through some of those assumptions and helps prevent, it might be the bigger piece, prevent people from making wrong assumptions about other people in the organization or family or what have you. Another strategy to overcome assumptions is to be clear, to be very, very clear. Back to Dr. Brené Brown for a second, the author I talked about previously. She says in one of her books, Dare to Lead, she says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So you have to be very clear if you're the one delivering the information about your expectations, the specifics of it, the time frame, and you have to over communicate the why. Why do you have to over communicate the why? Because of the pizza pie thing, right? Because I have something to tell you to make you do or to impact your thinking in some way, and you don't understand it because we have different pieces of pie. So I have to over communicate the why because of the pie. So be very, very clear, over communicate the why because of the pie. And when you're done communicating whatever it is you want to communicate, what you want to do is give permission for them to ask questions and to clarify any misunderstandings. So, for example, I say, hey, we need to do this, and this is why, and this is what we need to do, and this is why. Okay, I know that you're new to this shift, so is there anything that I can clarify for you? Or if you're a fast talker, which I obviously am not. I know I talk fast, so do you have any questions regarding any of this? So you want to kind of try to pull that information. What you're doing is giving permission to say, yes, I understand. You may not understand. Let me help you. And you're ensuring that the communication is received appropriately. Now, if you're the receiver, it's the same thing. When the communication is done, you want to ask questions such as, So just so I completely understand, you, and of course you repeat, you want me to do this and this because of this, this, and this, right? Did I miss anything? That's a good question. You repeat, did I miss anything? So really what I'm suggesting that you do is, and we do this back to the fire ground when we have fires and we're on the radio. Hey, I need you to go pull a ceiling on the second floor and check for anybody trapped in the bedroom. Okay, clear on that command. We're going to go to the second floor, pull ceiling, and check for any victims in the bedroom, right? So we do that because we understand that miscommunications can't happen on the fire ground, right? It's the same thing in real life. So ask for clarity, ask for if you missed anything, ask if there's anything that you can further explain, and do it in a way that you're really trying to get people to engage. Meetings. How many times do you come out of a meeting and nobody really knows what anybody is supposed to do? So clarity in meetings is very important. After meeting notes, you make notes and specifics of who is supposed to be doing what, and what is the expected time frame, what is the progress on any current projects, right? Who's responsible for what, and you share that out with the group after. A project scorecard or process scorecard, or there's a lot of software platforms that help in this with project management and whatnot. These are tools that are invaluable and will improve the communication of your team and your organization. So if you're going to take the time to have a meeting, be specific in regards to the notes and action items and who's supposed to do what after the meeting. Another way, a thing that we do organizationally a lot in the fire service is we have after call critiques. Some people call it a whitewash after an event, something like that. We talk about, when we do this in a formal way or in an informal way, we talk about what went right, what went wrong, lessons learned, what we could do better. And what we find in these activities is a lot of assumptions, and false assumptions are exposed and unveiled. And assumptions, if you don't look for them, you can't find them. So when we do that informally in the fire service, we call it a tailboard discussion. So the tailboard of the fire truck is like the bumper of the fire truck. So after we have a call, maybe it's not a big fire, maybe it's a motor vehicle accident or something, we gather as a crew behind the fire truck and we go over the same things, like what went right, what could we have done better, we could have tried this tool instead of that tool, etc. And once again, well, the assumption was this was the tool I needed to get that person out of the car in the situation. My assumption was false, it didn't work as good as I could have, etc. So after action reviews or whitewashing, good meeting notes, being very explicit and clear in your instruction and your reception of information. These are all great tactics to help bust through assumptions and assumption-driven bias. So right now we are going to take a pause on the 3 barriers to effective communication. I think that you all are getting a little bit tired of seeing this face and hearing this voice. I'm probably getting a little bit boring. So we are going to have a special surprise guest that I will introduce in a second. But the subject matter that the special guest is going to talk about is going to involve both the first and the second barrier to communication, those walls as well as those assumptions. And we're going to talk about difficult conversations, those very awkward conversations that nobody likes to have. So stand by for the special guest. Okay, I've got a surprise special guest with us today. It's Cottleville Fire Protection District's very own Kelly Dunkel. Kelly is, officially her title is the Executive Office Manager, but she's specifically our human resources and do it all specialist. Welcome, Kelly. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me. Hello, everybody.
Kelly, today we are talking about communication. And I know you have given some presentations and done some academic work on communication, specifically tough conversations or brave conversations.
Absolutely. So being in HR, sometimes we are tasked with some of the more difficult conversations, whether it be about performance or sometimes it can be about hygiene. Sometimes it can be just difficult things. We deal with medical leave. We deal with, people that are maybe having their own personal issues. So sometimes those conversations can be difficult because people can be emotional, whether it be happy emotions because they've had a child or sad emotions because they have somebody that's ill. And when it comes to performance issues and things like that, then maybe they're angry emotions. So communication is very important, being able to navigate those conversations.
I know Kelly's been a big resource to me as a fire chief. On occasion, I have to have a tough conversation, as well as some of the other chief officers that we have. Kelly coaches us and says, think about this, use these words, phrase it like this, reframe it like this, set the boundaries like this. And so Kelly's been a huge help in organizational communication here at the district. So I've got a couple questions for you, Kelly, just to kind of dig into tough conversations and brave conversations. First of all, why do you think it is that people avoid conflict and try to do whatever they can do to not have a tough conversation?
That is a great question. And we've all probably been there and had that dread of having to go have a conversation. And I think it's because we know people do have those emotions and those feelings and those thoughts, and sometimes they might not be the same as ours. And a lot of times a tough conversation is because there has been a set expectation. We're expecting somebody to be doing something and they're not meeting that expectation. So sometimes it's very personal for us. We don't want to have that conversation because we are frustrated. We are not sure how we're going to react. And so being able to go into a conversation and preparing yourself helps you have that conversation. So I think sometimes it's just having to deal with your own emotions and then trying to figure out how to deal with their emotions at the same time.
It's hard. I know I have the anxiety, get the butterflies. You start thinking about, well, I'm going to say this and they're going to say this. And if they do, I'm going to say this. And it rarely goes the way that you plan it out. But Kelly, how do you suggest that people try to get their emotions in check? What are some things that we can do to help relieve our own anxiety? Because as we know, the other person's going to mirror what we put out. So if we come in nervous, if we come in emotional, upset, and like the moment is too big for us, that's what we're going to get in return, and it's not going to be productive. So what advice would you have for somebody to deal with their own emotions?
Absolutely. I mean, that's so important to be able to process that. So I would say prepare yourself. A lot of times, I'm sure we've all gotten the email where you immediately want to respond and you start banging on the keyboard and you're ready to go. We know that conversation isn't going to be successful, or that response is not going to be successful. The same as if somebody calls you and takes you off guard and you feel those same emotions. Timeouts, preparing yourself, exactly what you said. Be prepared. Don't just dive into a conversation. You have to really step back and think about the situation. You have to remember that this person is on your team. You guys are trying to achieve the same goals and do the same things. There's just got to be some sort of misconnection, some miscommunication. Maybe your guys' understanding of expectations are not the same. So taking a step back and kind of asking yourself, do I believe that this person really has the same intentions as me? Do I think that they can do what I'm needing them to do? And what's maybe the gap? What are we maybe missing? And how can I go into the conversation, not making these assumptions, not making these accusations, but really asking yourself, what is missing here? What piece is missing, and how can we bridge that gap to be able to move forward together? Because ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We're all trying to move forward together, and we're all on the same team. Nobody really wakes up and says, I'm going to do whatever I can to mess everything up today, right? Yes, there's people out there that might do that, but for the most part, everybody wants to do a good job. Everybody wants to be successful. Maybe just our definitions of success aren't the same, and we have to realign those expectations.
So Kelly, I'm going to kind of reel you backwards just a little bit. So I know BRAVE is an acronym that you use when addressing this issue with brave or tough, brave conversations. Let's run through the letters, if you don't mind, Kelly, and tell us what BRAV and E each stand for, and just kind of give us the context of each one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to think I work with all of these brave men and women of Cottleville Fire District. And so I think about how a lot of them, probably a lot like all of us, would probably be more comfortable running into a fire sometimes than having these tough conversations. So it does take bravery to be able to go and have a tough conversation. So remembering when you're going into the conversation, once you've prepared for it, you've mentally prepared yourself, you're ready to go have the conversation. B stands for boundaries. Set a boundary. Know what is okay to be talking about and what's not okay to be talking about. And make them known. If somebody's crossing a boundary, let them know. That's not what I'm here to talk about.
Are you trying to tell me some employees try to take a left turn in a conversation and pull?
Absolutely. A right, a left, a right, backwards, any which way. But you have to be able to set that boundary. So once you've set the boundaries and you continue to set those boundaries, the next thing is realign. And I kind of mentioned that a little bit ago, is really restating that expectation. Maybe you thought that it was very clear, but it might not have been. So restating, I expected this, or I had thought when we left that meeting that you said you were going to do X, Y, Z. So being able to realign, make sure you're on the same page with that person.
Really what you're doing there is exposing the assumptions that were made that turned out to be potentially false, right? With a realignment. Let's revisit where we were and how we separated and went different ways, right? Just kind of a bringing back together, realignment. I like that. What's A?
A is asking questions. So just what you said, once you've set that realignment and trying to make sure that we don't have those assumptions made, ask those questions, open them up. Oh, I didn't realize you thought X, Y, Z. Are there barriers keeping you from getting to this expectation? So really asking questions and trying to understand what they're thinking.
And then we have a V.
V.
Volcano.
Right.
I mean,
sometimes
so many conversations are like a volcano, right? This is what we want.
Right. No. V is for vulnerable. And so it comes back to, it's not just about the other person, it's about us. So again, we had these assumptions, we had all of these things that we were thinking, but as we realign and we ask those questions, our thinking might be impacted. We have to be able to say, oh, I didn't realize that. I was wrong. So being vulnerable, because if you are just there to tell them what they think and what you think you already know, that's not a conversation. All we've talked about today, right, is communication and having two-way communication. If you go in there and it's a one-sided conversation, that's podcast. That's not a conversation. You're just talking, you're doing all the talking. It's not communication. That's just you projecting your thoughts. So being able to be vulnerable and really put yourself out there to go, I didn't realize that. Thank you for opening up.
So I guess the E is not explosion. Then I thought maybe it was explosion.
Right. Nope. A complete opposite. You have to exercise restraint.
Okay.
So I picture in my head somebody on a roller coaster and they're holding on and they got their eyes closed and they're being very patient while the next person next to them is just freaking out and screaming. And, they aren't exercising that restraint. They're letting it all loose. Well, you have to remember what we talked about. We came into this conversation prepared. We knew we were going to have this conversation. The person that you were talking to might not have been prepared for that conversation. They aren't ready for that. And so maybe they are having that explosion of profanities, or maybe they're just upset, or maybe they have emotions. And you have to be able to say, you know what? I can tell that you're upset. let's take a time out. Maybe we need to come back to this. But it's so important that you say that last part. Let's come back to this, because whatever you're trying to accomplish is important. It's important to you, and it's probably important to that other person. If they have emotions, whether it's happy, sad, angry, whatever it is, they have vested interest in it, right? If they were indifferent, they really don't care. They're not going to be upset or whatever emotion they're feeling. They're going to be indifferent. So if they're feeling some sort of passion around it, but need to take a time out, it's important to take that time out, but let them know that we need to have some sort of follow-up afterwards.
So brave, we have boundaries. We have, let's check my memory. Boundaries, realign.
Ask questions.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Volcano, vulnerability, and exercise restraint.
You got it.
Very good. So I have a question about asking questions.
Oh, okay.
Let's dive into that just a little bit, because what I have seen and experienced firsthand myself is you have a subject matter that's communicated and back and forth, and you're on the surface, and where you really need to go is to the bottom, right? You get to dig down into the issue. And I think too often we don't do that. We have very kind of on the surface communication, some superficial, oh, is that the problem? Oh, okay, very good. We're very polite as a society.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we need to be more honest, I think, and ask those questions that are like anchors that like go over the boat and they get down to where the good stuff is, where the big fish are, right? So how do you know what kinds of questions to ask? How do you find those insightful questions that help you get to the issue at hand?
I think that's a great question. And as you were talking about, sometimes we're afraid to get honest. The thing that resounds in my head is name it, right? Sometimes we're afraid to just name the issue. So rather than saying, you always are upset about this, or you always have an attitude about this.
Have you been spying on my home life?
Right? So rather than being accusatory about it, asking questions around that. I feel like sometimes it seems like you're upset. Is there something bothering you about this policy? So naming it, right? Like if somebody's got an attitude, they again have feelings around it. There's some sort of passion. We all know it. So if they say, no, I don't have a problem with it. Okay, well, you're sitting here with your arms crossed and, you're looking at the ground and you won't look me in the eye. Something's going on. What's up? So if it's not about that, is there something else that's bothering you? So staying on it, and not just when they give you the answer of everything's okay, going, great, I'm going to go back to my boss, tell them I had the conversation. They said that they were fine. We're going to be right back in that room 2 days later because something else is going to go on, or something's going to be frustrating for them, or something like that. So really just staying on it and trying to ask questions around that subject that continues to press on whatever, like you said, you're trying to get to the bottom of. So, but you have to name it. You have to be brave. You have to be willing to just name it and know it might be uncomfortable. They might
say. What it reminds me of? I keep having this picture in my head, and this is what it reminds me of. Have you ever seen the videos of like the people that go across, they're barefoot and they walk across the hot coals, and they, proving, I don't know if it's like mind over matter or what, and somehow they get through it, right? But I kind of think about that as something like the name it, like, naming it. It's like a hot coal. We're asking certain questions that might give you a moment of discomfort or awkwardness in the conversation. It's like another step on the hot coal, right? Versus standing back and going, those look hot. I think I'm going to walk around it. And you never realize what you're capable of from a management or a communication standpoint, right? So I guess what we need to do is be brave and just go across those hot coals.
I love that. I think that is so important. And I think I'm one of those weird people that I've had enough of these tough conversations and gotten to the other side and know that I can do it. And I always feel so much better once I've done it. I feel so accomplished rather than constantly wondering or being nervous or, oh my gosh. And just when you see that person and you know there's something going on, they know there's something going on too, and it's uncomfortable. So I'm get to the point where I'd rather walk on the hot coals and have that discomfort than constantly just making circles around the top of the volcano, right? So, but I think it is, once you have them and you can see that they are successful, you're going to want to do it and not just sit on it, because it just, you feel so much better. And a lot of times, back to that vulnerability, your thinking is impacted and you realize how much that person does care. And maybe there was just some disconnect. I think you find a lot of times that things run deep and they feel like, you said, management and leadership, maybe they've been wronged in the past. And now you have an opportunity to change the course of their thinking and say, that was in the past, let's move forward.
Fantastic, Kelly. You've inspired me to be brave. I'm so brave. I need to see you. I'm ready for that tough conversation. I need to see you in my office in 5 minutes to talk about some of your performance issues. I think you were about 3 minutes late today, so let's get that conversation done.
I'm not feeling so brave.
Just kidding, of course. Thank you, Kelly Dunkel, Cottleville Fire District's Executive Office Manager. So I hope you all enjoyed Kelly's input into this subject matter. And now we've got about 10 minutes left as we're going to talk about that third barrier to effective communication. The third and final barrier to effective communication that we're going to talk about today is something very scary to talk about. It's fear. Fear is a big part of why people don't want to communicate, because they're afraid. The number one phobia, right? Public speaking. We are afraid of public speaking, but not just public speaking. We're also afraid of talking in a group sometimes, speaking up in a meeting, talking to the boss. And why? Because we are afraid. Many years ago, I think 15, 16 years ago, I had a public speaking opportunity and I failed. I failed miserably. I had the quivers. My voice was quivering. My hands were shaking. I started sweating really bad and I couldn't breathe, and everybody could see it. At least that's what I thought. And they probably could. I cut the presentation short. I just wanted to get out of there. It was so uncomfortable. And I went home and I was just dejected. I felt terrible about myself because I wanted to be a good leader. And I knew, and I know now that leadership and communication are two of the same, two peas in the same pod, so to speak. You can't be a great leader and be a horrible communicator. And a part of that is being able to communicate to a group of people. And so in my dejection, I sat in front of my computer, and what do you do whenever you don't know how to do anything? You search for it. I searched for it, like I said, it was a while back, so I think I used Netscape. Today, people would use Google, right? Well, I Googled or Netscaped things. It was like how to improve public speaking or fear of public speaking. And one of the things that I found that really helped me turn the corner was an organization called Toastmasters. Toastmasters is a nonprofit organization, and its mission is to develop the public speaking and communication skills, the leadership skills of its members in a very supportive and positive environment. So that's one resource that's out there to you, and I do suggest that you Google it, and you can find it's much like a Kiwanis Club or a Rotary Club, in that there's local chapters all around. The next thing I did that really helped me in my communication skills, my presentation skills, is that I decided I was going to be okay with failure. Failure is just a step, a necessary step on the path to success. And once you figure that out and you become okay with failing. It kind of takes that sharp edge off of the knife of failing, to where I know I'm going to fail sometimes, and it's okay, because this is how you get better. Because presenting, especially in a public setting, but also from a team group setting, the only way you are going to get better is if you do it. It's nothing you can just go and practice. I mean, yes, we're going to talk about preparation and practice, but in terms of really improving, you have to just jump in the deep end and do it and go, I'm going to fail, but I'm also going to get better, and I'll be better next time. So I got okay with failure, and I kind of reframed it to see a challenge as nothing but an opportunity to improve, right? Um, and I made the decision all those years ago to never turn down a public speaking opportunity. And I guess that's why I'm in front of you today. I knew I was going to fail, but I said, never will I say no, because if I say no, it's probably because I'm afraid, and I'm not giving in to failure. So I made that decision some 15 or 16 years ago. And let me tell you what, I have failed. I've given some public speeches that were horrible. I've been nervous at times. I've misjudged my audience at times, but I came away and I said, yeah, well, I knew this day would happen. I knew this would happen. What can I learn from it? Why did this happen to me? And what can I do better next time, right? So you have to push ahead, get yourself out there. One of the best ways I have figured out, and this is common sense, but one of the best ways I've figured out not to be nervous is to over prepare. The more intimately familiar I am with the subject matter, with the material that I'm going to be presenting, if I know it by the back of my hand, a lot of those nerves kind of go away. Um, the more you practice, in a different way, what I was just speaking about. There have been times when I have sat on a park bench and just like I am now, just speaking, just talking, and practicing my words. The more you practice a speech, the more you practice a pep talk to your team if you're a supervisor, the more you, even in a one-on-one, you know you're going to have a difficult conversation. If I'm driving to a location to have one of those discussions, I am literally saying what I'm going to say when the time comes, so that it's not the first time that my lips and my tongue have been there, right? So to overcome that fear, how are we going to overcome this third major barrier to effective communication? Is we're going to push ahead. We're going to jump in the deep end, right? We're going to over prepare, practice those words, and then we're going to just get out there and do it. We're going to push ahead, persevere. A lot of P's, a lot of alliteration today. So those are the strategies to overcome the third major barrier to effective communication, fear. Number one, bring those walls down. Put your walls down, those barrier walls, those emotional safety mechanisms, and be authentic and vulnerable with boundaries. Number two, we are going to look for ways to find those assumptions and do away with those, right? To expose them and then break them down. Do that in a multitude of ways, but being clear, because clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Being very clear when we're giving information and when we are receiving information, asking those critical questions such as, is there anything else can I clarify anything for you, or did I understand you correctly? Number three, the fear. We're going to push ahead, practice, persevere, just get out there and do it. So I'm going to leave you with a concept. I don't know that it's really relevant to communication, but it's something I just want to share with somebody. So I'm going to tell you guys today. Years ago, I saw a picture, like a drawing. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to close your eyes, and I'm going to describe the drawing to you. But I want you to picture close your eyes. What I want you to picture is like a big hill full of dirt, and it's about 100 feet tall. It's basically like a mountain. Think about the Weldon Spring remedial action site, or I forget what they call it now, but out there in Weldon Spring where they have the radioactive material under the big mound. So it's a big mountain of sorts. And then you have a sun setting or starting to drop towards the horizon, right? And what does that do? It casts a shadow. So now we've got a nice thick shadow on the ground. And standing at the base of that mountain is a person. And they're facing away from the mountain. They're walking away, but they're in the shadow. The mountain is representative of their past. Okay? In their shadow, casting forward is representative of their future. And this picture I saw said, don't let your past become so large that it casts a shadow on your future. Don't let your past become so large that it casts a shadow on your future. In other words, you can't see where you are now. You can't see if you're about to step into a hole, right? You can't see a snake that's about to bite you because all you can see is your past and the shadow that it's creating over you. Think about that, please. Give that some thought. Think about today. Remove those shadows. Don't make your past is gone. Show me where your past is. Show it's not even here. So move forward with a positive mindset, positive attitude, and try to become the best communicator you can become today. Be authentic. Be open. Put your walls down. Be clear. Be very clear and kind. And let's not make assumptions. Let's try to see each other's piece of the pie, and let's overcome fear. That's all I have for you today. I'm Fire Chief Skip Stevens, Cottleville Fire District. It's been my pleasure to share just a little bit. I know it's not the most academically fantastic stuff you've ever heard. Much of it's common sense, but we all need a reminder that communication is king. Have a great day.